Hello, and welcome to The Public Square, a show that explores public affairs and religious liberty issues that affect our nation and beyond. My name is Pastor Pastor Paul Goodridge, and I'm your host. And I'm the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the South Central Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, located in Nashville, Tennessee. In each episode, we'll talk to people who are on the front lines for the fight for civil and religious liberty. My goal is to inform about issues that directly and indirectly have an impact on everyday life, ignite meaningful thought and reflection, inspire my audience to action, and integrate faith principles in how we relate to others. Today, we're going to talk about the relevance of religious liberty for the church and society in general, especially in light of the upcoming celebration of the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his work to advocate for freedom, equality, and justice. We also want to discuss the relationship between the church and civic engagement, focusing on how church members should seek to change public policy. And finally, we'll also hear from the Southern Union of Seventh-day Adventists about what's happening around the South Central Conference territory in the area of public affairs and religious liberty. So thank you for joining us, and let's meet in the public square. My first guest today is Melissa Reed. She is an Associate Director of the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department for the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. In this role, she advocates for the religious interests of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and its members on Capitol Hill. Melissa also serves as the Executive Director of the North American Religious Liberty Association, a member-driven advocacy organization dedicated to the promotion of liberty of conscience and freedom of religion as it combats religious intolerance at the local, state, and national levels. Good evening, Melissa, and welcome to the Public Square.
Good evening, Pastor Goodridge. Thank you so very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you. As am I. So let's dive into it. And maybe a rudimentary, elementary question. What is religious liberty? And just give us a brief history of religious liberty in the United States.
Sure. So very simply, religious liberty is the right to believe and practice your faith as your conscience dictates. So that's just the very basic definition of religious freedom or religious liberty. Here in the United States, from a historical perspective, we talk about the sort of the two arms of the Establishment Clause of the freedom of religion, the religious freedom. And one of those is the Establishment Clause. And basically that means no governmental preference for one particular faith tradition. And then no government interference, which is the free exercise clause. So no establishment, but free exercise. So it's basically the church and believers receiving respect for their distinctive faith traditions from the government. And again, here in the United States, we enjoy and appreciate a very distinct separation between church and state.
Okay. Well, thank you. So now your title is Associate Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty. So tell us a little bit about what do we mean by public affairs and how does it connect to religious liberty?
Sure. So public affairs is basically building relationships with key individuals in the community, primarily government or civic representatives. But through those relationships, it is seeking to position an organization, in this case, it would be the Seventh-day Adventist Church in my role, to a standing of credibility, of trust, and relevance in the public space. And so really it is, as you said, establishing those relationships, and being able to introduce your organization to the community through those relationships, and finding opportunities for partnership in those relationships as well. As far as how it
So,
connects, go ahead.
no, 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 because maybe go ahead, please, please.
Well, I was just going to speak to the connection to religious
Hmm.
liberty as far as my
Hmm.
particular role. So the public affairs side basically allows us as a faith tradition, as a denomination, to maintain religious autonomy, and our distinctive mission. So it is sort of the conduit that allows for the religious freedom component.
Okay, okay. No, I was going to say, in terms of why is it important to have these connections, to form these connections, in terms of legislators, etc.
Sure. Well, it's important. I think as Christians, we're called to be part of the community, right? We're called to serve the community, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters. And so I think that having these relationships, particularly when you think of the relationships with the government, that is, working with the government or as part of the government. That's probably one of the most powerful or influential ways to affect change within your community, right? And
Hmm.
so, working with the government, I think, is a very effective way for answering that, God's direction, that we serve each other.
Okay, okay. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that relationship between the church and legislators, and building that or forging those relationships a little bit later. But I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit with you, in terms of this idea of religious liberty. And many people think of religious liberty and just put it in a box, that it just talks about my ability to worship when I want to, and within the Seventh Day Adventist context, the ability to worship on Saturday in terms of the Sabbath, and also being able to not to have to work or take exams, etc., on the Sabbath, in honoring the Sabbath as outlined in the fourth commandment. But I want to ask, how does religious liberty affect everyday life, and the lives of individuals living, not here in the United States in particular?
Sure. So, religious liberty, as you mentioned, is, first of all, the right to public worship, to be able to come together as a community and worship together. And so, but it goes, as you said, goes beyond that quite a bit. So, first of all, or secondly, it's the right to conversion, the right to change your religion from one religion to another, or
Hmm.
to practice no faith at all. Um,
Mm.
it's the right to evangelism, the ability to be able to not just have your beliefs, but share them with others.
Hmm.
It's the ability to have your religious practices. You mentioned day of worship, but also things like, if you belong to a faith tradition that has particular grooming or garb requirements, having those sorts of religious practices accommodated by your employer. So not just the right to worship, but actually receiving accommodation, to be able to have time off, or to wear or groom in a particular way. And then from an organizational perspective, the ability to run a religiously affiliated organization in harmony with its faith tenets. For example, hiring and conduct standards.
Hmm. Okay, so no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
No,
ahead.
no, no. That was it. That was my list.
Okay, no, so what I'm hearing is, it's not just the right and the privilege and the ability for me to practice my personal religious beliefs, but it's also respecting other faith traditions and their right to practice their religious beliefs without me either imposing mine upon them, or having them impose them upon me. And then, I think you mentioned, the right not to practice religion or not to believe, or etc. So
Absolutely.
and there are many ways in which, and please kind of share some of these many ways in which the failure to respect other people's religions by either some of the laws that we enact or some of the tenets that we seek to impose can be a dangerous thing. Can you give us some examples of this?
Absolutely. So if we look at the international stage, so the US State Department every year issues or publishes a list of countries of particular concern as far as religious freedom issues go. And the types of issues that you see or that are very frequently are the issues that merit someone being on this list is things like having blasphemy laws with
Mm,
very strict, harsh punishments for people that are um, not believers or not a part of the mainstream faith tradition there.
hmm.
Things like anti-conversion laws. We talked before, that conversion is a real component of religious freedom. But there are countries that have anti-conversion laws. There's a dominant religion. But then, there are also challenges that occur not from the government, but from a majority religion that can be
Hmm.
implemented. For example, sectarian violence that can be implemented against minority faith traditions. So it can come both from the government and from powerful social groups as well. If we look here at home, and we look at some of the issues that are facing churches and believers today, um, employment, housing, public accommodation, and conduct standards by houses of worship and parachurch organizations. So, the Seventh-day Adventist Church runs an educational institution, of which Oakwood University is one of the
Yeah.
prominent schools. So, being able to have employment standards for, a religious institution, to have housing standards, public accommodation, which basically means serving the public and not who you're serving, but what you are allowing to take place in your house of worship, for example.
Mhm.
And then conduct standards. So that's really where we're seeing a lot of challenges here in the United States is a pressing up of or conflict of rights in those areas. And then I think another really big challenge for Christians is the societal perception of what religious freedom is.
Mm,
It's interesting. As Seventh Day Adventist, Christians, we have a history, and I would say a very proud history, and I think you would agree with me, as far as recognizing the benefit of the separation of church and state.
yeah.
But a lot of Christians here in the United States, unfortunately, are not have either pulled away from or moved away from or have never had an understanding of the separation of church and state, and instead are looking to the government to be a part of their Christian witness, to use the government in that tool, right?
Hmm.
And so, as far as societal perceptions go, you have sort of one extreme perception, which is that religious freedom is just an excuse, a right to discriminate, right?
Yeah.
And then you have on the other extreme side that religious freedom, and this is one that we kind of coined, that religious freedom for me, but not for thee. What you kind of described earlier, as far as, yes, that was my Quaker impression. Um, and so that is, religious freedom for what we think is the correct religion to receive the
Yeah.
freedom. And those who are not a part of that belief system, their rights are not respected. And so, yeah, I think societal perception is a big challenge here in the United States as far as what exactly freedom of religion or freedom, liberty of conscience actually means.
Absolutely. And so if we drill down a little bit more, especially when it comes to the day-to-day aspects of our lives, and you hinted at it, but I just want to unpack it a little bit more. So in terms of in the whole area of healthcare, and I know that now we're also kind of delving a little bit into how religious liberty is connected with with public affairs. But when it talks about healthcare and the ability to have access to healthcare, and how these laws and potential laws and legislation, etc., is crafted to benefit one set of people or one group of individuals as opposed to the other, really is kind of a public affairs religious liberty issue, because it's infringing upon the right of everybody to have access to good, adequate, decent health care, or it could be housing, or it could be education, it could even be water. As we know what happened, what's happened in Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi, etc. So as we drill down a little bit in terms of the specifics, day-to-day life of individual, how important, how relevant is religious liberty and public affairs in these areas?
Well, I think it's critical. I mean, again, particularly if you're a believer, then I think it's absolutely critical. We mentioned the different, all the things that sort of go around what we think of in that term of religion. But what you're describing, what you were just mentioning, I think is an excellent point. And I think what jumped to my mind was voting rights, right? Like
Hmm.
the right to vote and the ability to follow your conscience by checking that ballot, having access to that, like that is a Christian principle, right? That's something
Hmm.
that we as Christians should be advocating for. The treatment of individuals in the justice system, right? I think that's another
Yes.
area where we're seeing again. It seems that, I mean, it doesn't seem we have biblical instruction to be to participate in caring
Yes.
for the marginalized in our community. So I
Hmm.
think absolutely that falls under the public affairs component of the work of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we only have a couple of minutes left in this segment, but I do want to turn our attention to something very important, because there are a number of dangers of extreme agendas that affect religious liberty today. Just talk about that a little bit. One of them being, say, Christian nationalism. Just give us a headline news version of what Christian nationalism is and why extreme agendas is very critical and potentially extremely harmful to the area of religious liberty.
Sure. Well, absolutely. And so, we'll talk specifically about Christian nationalism, but we also can see, and I would invite our listeners today to watch out for an announcement, a save the date, and then an open
Hmm.
registration for an event that we will be hosting, the North American Division Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Office, this fall, October 20 and 21, at Southern Adventist University. And let me just give you the title, and then I'll jump back to
Sure, please.
broad look at what Christian nationalism is. But the conference that we'll be holding at Southern is Reconstructing Religious Liberty in a Time of Religious and Secular Extremism. And
Hmm.
so if we talk about this religious extremism, um, there's a really good book that was written by Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, two sociologists. It's called "The Flag and the Cross," and it's talking about their concerns with Christian nationalism.
Hmm.
And the way that they describe Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that blurs distinctions between Christian identity and American identity. And it's viewing the two as closely related and
Yeah,
seeking to enhance and preserve their union.
yeah,
And again, from a Christian perspective, from students of prophecy, we recognize this is something to stay away from. This does not end well for anybody, right? I mean,
Yes.
you don't even have to be a student of prophecy. You just have to be a historian, a student of history. And you can see when you see those blurring of those lines between church and state, that it's not good for either institution. And so that's what we see when we see the danger, these extreme agendas. Another author that I was looking at was talking about Christian nationalism that we've reached out to invite to participate in our conference. He says Christians must relearn how to love our country without idolizing it. And I think that is
Yeah.
exactly right. Because, again, we look at Christ's example of when he was here on earth. He was being, by the people, called to set up this kingdom on heaven. And he said, that's not what it's about. That's not who I am as a, sort of coercing religious practice through government is inconsistent with who our God is. So it's something, again, I think a trend that should be very concerning to us.
Yeah, yeah. And this idea of imposing one view of religion over another to the point where you're demonized or you are, marginalized and considered un-American
Yep.
unless you conform to this specific particular type of religion and the practices that come with that.
And again, I think it's incorrectly elevating the role of government in the life of a Christian, right? You shouldn't be looking to put on the same plane your faith and your patriotism. Your faith
Yes.
should always be, as a Christian, should always be, the priority. And so again, I think it's just something really concerning. I will say very quickly, I'm not sympathetic, but I do understand the sentiment of look where we are as a nation, look sort of how the world is, and wanting to react, wanting to see it, to implement change from a Christian perspective. But this is absolutely the wrong way to go about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, we've run out of time, and maybe especially when it comes a little bit closer to the conference in October, we'll look to have you back where we can kind of unpack a little bit more this idea of Christian nationalism and some of these extreme agendas and how it affects us as a church, but also how it affects us as individuals. Because we could talk about abortion rights, we could talk about just the everyday decisions that we either are able to make or some people are trying to influence our ability to make. And so, yeah, we want to be able to have you to come back. But we thank you for your time, and we enjoyed this segment, and thank you for kind of giving us a brief overview of the importance of religious liberty.
Thanks, Pastor.
All right. So we'll be right back after this, and we'll shift into another phase of our program. So, with me in this second segment are two individuals who I highly respect. The first is Reverend Dr. Will Boyd, who is the presiding bishop of Zion Ministries and pastor of the St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church in Florence, Alabama. He was the first African American elected to the office of city councilman in Greenfield, Illinois. He served as the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Representative of Alabama's 5th Congressional District. And he also was elected chair of the Lauderdale County Democratic Executive Committee. He also ran for the U.S. Senate, which was eventually won by Senator Doug Jones in 2017. He also was elected to Alabama State Democratic Executive Committee. He was the nominee for Lieutenant Governor, for Alabama, and most recently ran again for U.S. Senate in Alabama. Welcome, Dr. Boyd.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good, good. We also have Pastor Keith Goodman, Senior, who is a good friend of mine. Let me just full disclosure, we're classmates. So, but he's a preacher, he's a musician, but he's also a civic leader. He served all over the country, in Chicago, in North Philadelphia, in Chester, Pennsylvania, Houston, Texas, and now he's in Columbus, Ohio. And Pastor Goodman ran for city council in Chester, Pennsylvania, and also ran for mayor of Philadelphia. So welcome, Pastor Goodman.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. So listen, and I'm going to ask this question of each of you, and either of you can choose to go first. But tell us a little bit about your interest in politics and what made you run for political office.
Dr. Boyd, I'll let you go first.
Well, you may want to go first. I believe I'm having some technical difficulties here. My screen appears to be very blurry, and I don't even know if you can hear me or not.
We can hear you, but I'll go ahead and start and give you a minute. My interest in politics was very, it was something that I came to. I didn't come out of Oakwood saying, I want to run for political office. I was asked both times that I ran to run. And it came out of my involvement in the community. When I was in Chester, we had been involved with helping. It was a city that was 72% African American, and yet the party that we normally think that African Americans are associated with, very few of them were associated with it. And so it was a part of empowerment. We did programs there that mentored children of incarcerated parents with members of the different churches of all the different faiths. And that was when I got to know the first mayor of Philadelphia, Dr. W. Wilson Good. Well, that relationship carried through from me pastoring in Chester and then on to Philadelphia. And I had the unique experience of having the sitting mayor, Mayor John Street, who was a member of my church. And different things happened over time. And it just happened that after a certain mayor had been in, there was nobody running. And someone who had noticed the influence that we had had in the city said, this is a unique time and you ought to throw your name in for mayor. And so that's kind of how it came. Both times I was asked to run. I didn't set out to say, I want to be councilman, I want to be mayor, but it came, it was more organic.
Okay. But I know this also came out of your desire to serve the community, to make an impact in the community. And so obviously they saw something within you in terms of what you were already doing and wanted to give you an opportunity of taking that to another level. So let me ask you, and I know that we're having a little bit of difficulty with Dr. Boyd, and we'll hopefully be able to have him come back. So yeah, we're still having a little difficulty with Dr. Boyd, but that's okay. What was your experience in terms of running for office? Is that something as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor and as Seventh-day Adventist is that something that's common? What kind of support did you receive from the Seventh-day Adventist community?
Well, let me say that I'm not sure that it's common, although there are several Seventh-day Adventists who are in politics and have been. George Vanderman was in politics for years out in California. When I left Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to pastor another Seventh-day Adventist congressperson, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. So I've had an interesting experience. So I happen to run into a lot of Seventh-day Adventists who are involved in politics, but I'm not sure that so many of us are involved. But for me, the reason why I believe that our message is aimed at the whole person. So our ministry was so often reaching people at the level of just ministering to their needs. The burden for me was that at the level of politics, you can change things at the level of systems that make things better for people, not just when you give them a loaf of bread or give them some clothes, but you can actually shift things for generations. And at the time, the mayor that we had, he was a fine man, but he was closing libraries, closing swimming pools, and those kinds of things had an immediate impact upon the people that I pastored. Because
Yes.
if those people didn't have the ability to get a membership at a local club, when the city decides to cut the budget, the first things we're going to take out are the things that actually positively engage the young people in our community. Those are the things that drove me to say, if we have a message to the whole person, then it's not at odds or antithetical for me to be involved in trying to make life better for people at that level. So that's, now you asked if I had support. I did. My conference administration, particularly when I ran for city council, were very supportive of the run. It was a little different the second time around, but the first time I had a lot of support.
Okay. And so Dr. Boyd, you're back with us. So let
Yes,
me
sir.
kind of step back a little bit and ask you, tell us about your interest in politics and what made you run for political office.
Actually, my interest came about while I was in college. Had the opportunity to serve as a house page for a state representative. So in between engineering classes, I would run back and forth to the state capitol and have the opportunity just to see how government was working at the state level. And then, of course, later on in life, I moved on after serving as a dean and a professor and a bishop and a pastor to have the opportunity to run for public office. I did and won a historical election, first African American elected in my city in Illinois, and then moved on to Alabama and continued on that journey. So politics has been there. My parents have instilled in us servant leadership. My dad's been appointed by a governor. My mom served as an educator as well. So we just believe in serving people. That's what it's all about.
Okay. And so, Dr. Boyd, tell us a little bit in terms of the I know there is a rich history of the Black church's involvement in politics and government. So just kind of give our listening audience a little a little taste of that.
Well, I'm by no means a great historian like others out there, like Henry Louis Gates and others who could definitely talk about the history of the Black church. But long story short, I believe the Black church has always taken an instrumental part in people being able to experience liberties that we enjoy now. Pastors and people on the pews have been instrumental in working together. Church has been the place where people could express themselves, where we found art, poetry, where people engage in speaking, empowering people. And so it's only natural that when people wanted an outlet by which they could actually communicate their views, they went to the church. The church was a gathering place. It was usually a central location for people to congregate and then, of course, go out into the community and, of course, be like that salt that's coming out of the salt shaker, right? To influence and help the world.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I want to kind of dive into something that you shared, Pastor Goodman, in terms of this idea of dealing with systems. And this is kind of where we really delve into this idea of the public affairs side of public affairs and religious liberty. Because as a church, we, are very good with meeting needs, with, as you said, kind of handing out that bread, to individuals who are hungry. But then when you understand why they're hungry, and you look at, things like food deserts and where where companies, etc., place their stores, etc., and the type of stores and the kind of neighborhoods that they play. Now you're dealing with systems that need to be addressed, and the only way that you can adequately address that is by having a seat at the table where these decisions are made. And so, tell us a little bit more about that in terms of the importance as a church for us to get involved in that level. On that level.
Well, absolutely. I don't know if I can articulate it better than you just did. But no, absolutely. One of the things is that we are members of a community, as individuals, but also as our churches. Our churches are a part of the community. We take up space. In Philadelphia, You know, we had a fairly large congregation and no parking lot. And so every Sabbath, you know, 600 congregants are coming together and taking up parking spaces. And so I was always challenging my people. We are members, we are neighbors here. And even though some of them may have grown up in those communities and then, you know, because they had gotten good jobs, moved out to the suburbs, we were still a part of that community. And so we had to take an interest in the good and the welfare of that community. So as members of the community, we have a voice. And Seventh-day Adventists tend to be pretty well-to-do, middle-class people. We can use that voice. We tend to be educated, articulate, to speak on behalf of others who may not be able to articulate what's going on. We could do the research. We, you know, so for me, it's a responsibility. It is one of the things that we talk about in Seventh-day Adventism is stewardship. And so the stewardship of our influence requires us to be invested and involved on behalf of others who may not have that voice.
Yeah. And Dr. Boyd, you would mention in terms of your parents instill this idea of service, instill this idea of looking for the out for the best interest of others. And again, you know, as you know, are presiding over churches, etc., that idea of advocating not just for your members, but also for your communities. In what ways do you feel it's important that as a church we do that?
Well, I can give you an example with the state of Alabama. Although it's a beautiful state, I traveled the state with the last U.S. Senate run explaining in Lowndes County, we have people who are not connected to a sewer system today who have been waiting to tap into a septic system or sewer system since 1987. We have in Pickens County where there are people who are 51 minutes away from a hospital. So if someone had a head-on collision, or in the case of one child who actually was attacked by a dog, his head was crushed, lost an eye, he had to travel 51 minutes without ambulatory services, without a rescue squad, fire to get him where he needed to go. We have food deserts. We have places like Bishop Mountain where people are still looking for clean water. So we have third world issues here in Alabama. We may tout or get excited about the fact that we have low unemployment, but let's look at who is unemployed and where the opportunities are for economic development. So it's important that we, with our faith, our beliefs, our values, no matter which religion we're a part of, understand that everyone, all of our constituents, need a voice. And that's the main thing I articulated on the campaign trail. I'm running because I want every Alabamian, every American really, to have a shot at the American dream.
Yes, absolutely. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, as I was listening to Dr. Boyd, it made me think of, it's been years since I was on the campaign trail, but I remember that a part of my stump speech was to tell this story about this old fable that there was this town where people would have to walk along a road that was near a high ridge, and the people would walk and that there wasn't any light out there, and sometimes people would slip off the cliff and they'd get hurt, and they would buy ambulances to pick people up at the bottom of the cliff. And somebody said, well, why don't we put up a guardrail? And that was my reason for being involved, to say, when you serve people at the church level for so long and you see what's going on, you see why these boys are getting into trouble and, you know, doing what they're doing. At some point you say, I can see what the problem is. Let me see if I can get to the point where the problem is originating.
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah, I told people while on the campaign trail as well about us putting the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff rather than putting up the guardrail.
Really?
Absolutely. So we're connected here, Pastor Goodman. We are.
Wow.
Yeah, we tend to be reactionary or trying to address problems on the back end rather than being proactive. And that's the problem we have. We're building prisons in Alabama. And you know what Frederick Douglass said, paraphrasing it, you know, it's harder to rebuild broken people rather than, of course, working with people all along from the beginning. So we have to do better. And that's why, again, it's important that we can step up and do right.
But now the challenge that I see when it comes to this idea of religious liberty and public affairs and the misunderstanding of the separation between church and state is the idea that, well, as church members, we just need to deal with the religious side of things and leave politics to the politicians.
Right.
What do you see as some of the dangers of that type of thinking?
Dr. Boyd, you want me to go first?
You go ahead.
So, man, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but a lot
That's
of
okay.
I'm
Good
always in
trouble.
trouble. Go
Good
ahead.
trouble.
it's theological. So a lot of the theology that we have embraced comes out of the dominant culture's interpretation of the scriptures, which allowed them to teach us from slavery on through that our bodies were not to be valued. So we would just look forward to, I got shoes, you got shoes, all God's children. When I get to heaven, James Cone is a gift to the body of Christ in his Black theology, because what he does is he elevates the body. In the body of Jesus Christ, he connects it to our Black bodies that have value. He sacrificed his body on our behalf, but his body had value. Therefore, our bodies have value. And what I'm saying is it's a theology that is not rooted in a New Testament understanding of who Christ was and what he came to do, that allows us to disconnect spirituality from caring for the welfare of women's bodies, of Black bodies, and even of gay, lesbian, transgender, all those bodies. As human beings created in the image of God, our theology should make us say, we care about people now.
Absolutely.
Not just their souls or their spirit when Christ comes again.
That was powerful. The framers, as we call them, really did not have a problem with religion. And I always tell people about what separation of church and state is really about from the perspective of the Constitution. I have a amendments book and a Constitution book that I keep in front of me. It's all highlighted and marked up. But it's interesting that even George Washington referenced God in his inaugural and even in his farewell addresses. He talked about the importance of morality and religion, and he called them indispensable supports as it relates to political prosperity. People enjoyed religion because it helped basically to make this idea of republic easier with less unruly people, if you want to call it that. So the framers weren't trying to do away with religion. They were trying to actually protect and make sure that the state did not have preferential treatment over one particular church, if you want to call it that, versus another. So I think people have a misunderstanding about what the intent was, what the goal was. And I know we could go into the difference between establishment and exercise, and then there are different definitions of what exercising is all about. But with all that being said, I think that has allowed, if I could be very, very transparent, it could get me in trouble. I think we've allowed it to go to a point now where certain people feel like, well, because we are the church and we're a 501c3, we can't say this. But then you notice other churches move their, if you want to call it designation, as it relates to the IRS, from 501c3 to another status, and then they say whatever they want. So you have people pushing an agenda from the pulpit over here and others being told you can't say anything over there. When we have to recognize that we have to, even if not around a church setting, be people who were involved. So I think church leaders, I think church members, if I could address them that way, should be very active in framing legislation because it will affect us. You could even argue from a biblical perspective that right, Jesus did not spend his time acting as a politician, but we know that the way that the Bible is presented to us, we call it the King James version in one sense. Politics influence which books went in, which books went out. Now, it's all inspired by God. I know it's all inerrant, but politics plays a hand in so many different areas of our lives and we don't know it. If we go back to another rule people call or reference, it's called the golden rule, and not necessarily one we may be thinking about, but people like to say those who have the gold tend to make the rules. So we have to be careful who we allow to influence legislation. And that's why we all need to have a seat at the table. And someone else said, obviously, if they don't give you a seat, bring your lawn chair, get involved, try your best to get in the process. Otherwise, people continue to push laws out that unfairly harm us so that we can't move forward and enjoy the blessings of liberty ourselves.
Absolutely. And The danger of not getting involved is that when these legislations, when these laws are made and when they're enacted, and then when we realize how adversely it affects us, then we want to say something, then we want to
Absolutely.
complain. But by that time, it's too late.
Too late. Too
And
late.
so, and listen, you both ran for office, and so you understand that everybody's not all good and everybody's not all bad. And there are laws of unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
That you think something is good for one set of people, etc., but its unintended consequences negatively affect another group of individuals. But if you are not aware of the potential impact that it has on everybody, then you can just, out of ignorance, go support a particular piece of legislation, but yet realize that afterwards the negative impact it has on somebody. So it's important. I believe it's important to speak up, and from what I'm hearing from the two of you, it's important for us to speak up as a church.
Absolutely.
To be able to address these, not just for ourselves, but I think Pastor Goodman, you talked about the fact that God has called us to advocate on behalf of everybody.
Absolutely.
And I mean, aren't we moving into the celebration of Dr. King's birthday?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
We're going to celebrate 60 years of him being in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, he was a pastor in Atlanta.
Yes.
And on that Good Friday, April 12th, he was arrested and was in jail in Birmingham. And his letter was written to clergymen who were telling him, oh, you ought not, you're an outsider, you need to take it slow. And his thing was, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So he's living in Atlanta and he's saying, no, I'm coming down here because my brothers and my sisters in Birmingham need justice. He was killed in Memphis. You know what I mean? Because he was caring about the welfare of other people. And people of privilege, whether they are white, whether they are middle-class Seventh-day Adventists, whether they're Baptists, whatever they are, people of privilege have a stewardship responsibility to stand up and advocate and speak up for and defend the rights of and the humanity of everyone.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. So we're coming close to our time together, but I want to give you an opportunity, and maybe you did kind of summarize it, Pastor Goodman, but I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share a message that you want to leave with pastors, with church members who feel that the church should, as we talked about, just stick with religion and leave politics to others. What message do you want to share, especially as you pointed out, Dr. and Pastor Goodman, we're about to celebrate the life and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
I would say that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. And I think that sometimes in an attempt to try to remain faithful to the tenets of Christianity or Seventh-day Adventism in particular, that sometimes we get paralyzed and do nothing. But God didn't give us a spirit of fear. And if we believe that the Holy Spirit is active in the world, you know what I mean, that he will lead and he will guide us. So when we see and feel called to something, maybe it's never been done before. Maybe no Adventist has done it before. Maybe no Black person has done it before. God has not given us a spirit of fear. Go ahead, pray on it. God will guide. I never won what I ran for. But in that city where I ran for city council, it was 100 years since there had been an administration of the other party. And we know that you need balance for justice to shake itself out. Even though I lost by 400 votes, the very next election, people were elected on the other party. And things began. So I'm saying God called me not to win, but to make a difference. And I think that that's what we ought to do, to say, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen with this, but I feel God, he's putting a tugging in my heart and I got to go for it and let him do what he's going to do.
Okay, and Dr. Boyd?
I agree wholeheartedly with Pastor Goodman. One of the concluding statements I made about being in office, when people ask me about term limits or how long I wanted to serve as a senator, I would tell them exactly what Pastor Goodman just said, that I don't want to make a career out of being in the Senate. I just want to make a difference. So that's important. Dr. King was an ordained minister. Representative John Lewis was an ordained minister. And if we even go towards the Speaker of the House, one of the first speakers of the House, I believe his name was Muhlenberg, he was an ordained minister also. So we can be people of faith, but at the same time recognize the need to embrace all people and fight for all people. And that's what I believe we have to do, not only from the pulpit, but even in the pews. We have to be people who are willing to fight for everyone, no matter what our stances or positions are on the issues. What's right for the people, what needs to be done. And that's what we should take towards not only the ballot box to make sure that we vote, but make sure every voice can fundamentally be heard.
Okay.
Excellent.
Dr. Boyd, thank you so much for joining us. Pastor
Thank you.
Goodman, thank you so much for joining us. We
Gentlemen, it's been
appreciate
a
your
privilege
insight.
to be with both of you.
It's been my
Boy, we
honor.
got to stay connected, man. We gotta
Yes, sir.
stay connected.
Please. We have that connection.
Yes,
you, Pastor.
sir. You're welcome. You're welcome. We'll be right back after this. So for our last segment, we want to talk a little bit about religious liberty around our conference, the South Central Conference. And with me is Kevin James, Pastor Kevin James. He's an ordained pastor. He served as Director of Legislative Affairs of the Nevada-Utah Conference. And currently he serves as the Associate Director of the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department here at the Southern Union, here in our region of Seventh-day Adventists. So welcome back, Kevin.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right. So listen, tell us, you know, and this, you know, I want this to be a regular segment in which you kind of share what's happening in the area of religious liberty around the South Central Conference. So what 2 or 3 things can you share with us and that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, presently, South Central is kind of quiet, you might say, in the sense of anything going on. I mean, after we had that situation with Oakwood Academy here a few months ago, there hasn't been anything really, what can I say, out there, so to speak, that we've been working with. Some of our work is actually starting to pick up a little bit, but around the union, actually, it's a little bit slow on religious accommodation, although I've had about 5 new cases this week, because, you know, the economy is still humming and employment is still, you know, companies are still hiring, even regardless of the issues of recession that might be coming up or whatever, but they're still hiring. And so many employees have leverage, so to speak, in that employers don't want to lose them. And so I think that's part of the reason why we're not getting a lot of that usual clashes you can get between employer and employee on that. So that's a good thing. So I'm not complaining about that, but we continue to work on issues of vaccine exemptions, for example. I've had a couple of those lately as well. That's in the healthcare area mainly, although there are some larger companies that are still mandating the vaccine for its employees. One of the other interesting things that we did have come out of the union, and this can happen kind of anywhere, although it didn't happen in the South Central Conference, is we had a situation where a church had gone to a supporting ministry of the church to do a series of evangelism in their community. And they had everything set up, and they were going to set up in a school, which is very common, using a school auditorium. Yeah. And they were coming near, they had invested, you know, about 20 grand by the time, you know, they had the contract signed and everything, and had invested about 20 grand already with the advertising, the cost of the ministry, and other supplies. And the principal of that school saw the poster which is kind of very interesting, loud. It catches your attention. It's not a poster perhaps that I would use in evangelism, but that's not the point. The point is that was, it was a poster, and the principal was offended. And so they pulled the contract. And so there goes $20,000 pretty quickly there. They were just within weeks of beginning the series, and suddenly they don't have a place to be. But what we ended up doing was, because what the school had done had overreacted, and they were in a contractual relationship that was costing people a lot of money for just something that they didn't like the taste of the presentation of the poster. And so our union, the particular conference that this happened in, as well as our church in the North American division and the General Conference, all got together, and we were going to we moved into the process of litigating that to defend the right of that church to have its meetings. And lo and behold, we're very thankful that with just a few days ago, probably 3 or 4 days ago, the school relented and is going to allow them to go ahead as planned with that series of meetings. So we're very excited about that. But those are the kind of things that we find out that we find happening. One of the areas too, Paul, I don't know if I mentioned this the last time though, but every summer you're aware of, there's many students of our colleges and high schools that go out and do the MAGA book program, right?
Yes.
Where you got a group of young people being led by a couple of leaders, and they go out and they distribute literature. Very large scale, very successful program, very important one, one that really engages our young people and solidifies them in their faith as they see God working in the process, as they're meeting people and sharing with them of these good words. Well, one of the things that we're often finding right now is this whole idea of solicitation laws that are in some cities that we can run afoul of, so to speak, not necessarily we ourselves, but they would be statutes, municipal, it's usually municipal statutes, city statutes, that are actually out of bounds with the free exercise of religion. They will require certain things to happen before you can do that. And anyway, we've run into those things, and that's one of the things. Every summer we probably have 2 or 3 of those, where we'll have some of our students, unfortunately, experience the inside of a jail cell because they were arrested for doing God's work because of a bad statute. And many times we are having to go and you don't like going to court, but sometimes you have to defend the rights and to show where they're out of line with our laws and with freedom of religion. And thankfully, we've been able to overturn many of those statutes. They have to be redone. And of course, we help our programs there too, and help the young people as well. But probably 3 times out of the year that happens with us. So it's those kind of things that happen on a regular basis. But it's keeping us busy. But like I said, the South Central has been kind of quiet after the Oakwood Academy. We haven't had major. In fact, I don't think I've even had an accommodation case come out of your conference recently, which is kind of unusual because I oftentimes will get about 1 a month or so, maybe from there. You have a lot of manufacturing, especially with cars and things like that, like in Alabama. Different kind of manufacturers and textile in Tennessee and whatnot. And those kind of jobs are jobs that can find people of faith challenged with having to make that decision, that agonizing decision between keeping their, practicing their faith and being loyal to God, and or possibly losing their job. And so lately, as I said, because of I think the economy at this point, it's been kind of quiet, and I like those kind of things. That's good.
Okay. Well, so a couple of things that you said that kind of I want to dive into a little bit more.
Okay.
You're talking about the idea of legislation. Sorry, excuse me, litigation and
Yeah.
having to go to court, etc.
Yeah.
So this kind of ties in with the religious liberty offering, and this is the time in which we are, asking our members to be able to support religious liberty. This coming Sabbath, the 14th of January,
That's right.
is Religious Liberty Sabbath. And so when we talk about this religious liberty offering, much of the offering actually goes towards litigating cases. So tell us a little bit about the importance of being able to have a representative to be able to go to court on an individual's behalf, to be able to litigate and defend their religious liberty.
Well, it's a very important part of it. With the Liberty Offering, I always share with churches, give above and beyond the subscriptions that you might be sponsoring at the time. Sponsor all that you possibly can. I ask churches to sponsor, especially to clergy in your local area. And the reason
now, sorry. Let's just be clear. We're talking about Liberty Magazine,
correct.
Which is
so we're talking about the campaign, and the campaign's about religious and the subscriptions, and we're doing that. So the reason I say all that is that getting people with their subscriptions, I always encourage them to go above and beyond covering the subscriptions.
Yeah, no. I was sorry. I was just trying to, because some individuals may not necessarily know what we're talking about in terms of subscriptions and what the subscription is for. And so it's for Liberty Magazine, which is the official magazine for the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department, which it shares information for everybody, but in particular, legislators, government officials, individuals who will make laws that affect what we do. And so we want to be able to share with them concerns that we have, issues that may affect our membership and individuals. And so that's what we're talking about in terms of being able to send those subscriptions to certain individuals.
Correct, and that's what the offering is about too. And so I'm sorry I didn't clarify that. But that's exactly right. We're dealing with those subscriptions. We've got a new editor now, Bettina Krause, and the magazine. She's doing a fantastic job with the magazine. And another thing that I appreciate about Bettina's leadership in this is that the articles now are very pertinent. They're very, not that it hasn't been, but they're pertinent. They're very fresh. But what I like about it is that she has a way about making, asking the writers of those articles to make them comprehensible, to the average.
Yes.
It's not just the legal stuff. And so you're doing a fine job with that. So I would encourage people to get a copy themselves in that process. But that's what the offering is for. And when the offering goes above the subscriptions that a church may have, people wonder what happens with those offerings. And those offerings are what go into a fund that deals with litigation. It deals sometimes with travel when we're having to do mediations for equal employment opportunity charges of discrimination or unemployment benefits that may have been denied. And those, but we have the litigation fund, and that's always built up. We have that litigation fund in a special pot. And when it comes time, and we try to avoid those times, but when it does become time, there's part of it that we partner with from the union, from the conference, and from the NAD and the general conference. And so it's very important to have those extra dollars because sometimes you have to go to the mat, as they say. You just have to wield the sword of the law, so to speak, in order to defend our liberties and to preserve what we do have and to clarify, what our liberties are about. And that's what a lot that goes with that litigation and involvement there. So very important.
And you know, specifically when it comes to, you know, and you referenced it in terms of the case that Oakwood Adventist Academy
Yeah. Hmm.
brought
Perfect
against the
example.
you know, Alabama High School Association,
Right.
Athletic Association. We were able to win the case, first of all, because we were able to present a case, and we were able to, you know, go to
That's right.
court and go through the legal process. And as a result of winning, yes, you know, our court costs were covered. But the essential thing is Oakwood Adventist Academy did not have to pay a dime to be
Correct.
represented, based on, you know, the overflow of the religious liberty offering and what we do as a religious liberty
Exactly.
department. So
Exactly.
we're thankful for that.
That's
All
right.
right.
Litigation's expensive.
It is. It is. It
It's
is.
amazing.
Well, well, Kevin, again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
You
Paul.
know, hopefully the next time that you're with us, it's a good and bad thing. Hopefully, there's nothing that happens that you'll be able to say, well, you know, you know.
That's right. That
Hopefully,
maybe I'll bring a little more to the table that's pertinent to the
well,
South Central. But you know, Paul, we're all in this together. You know, we're all the family of God,
absolutely.
and we're affected in perhaps another conference or another church. We're still all affected. The body is still
Yes.
having
Yes.
to
Absolutely.
address these things. And so I'm grateful for the body of Christ. I'm grateful that we have uh, your conference and other conferences that we have oversight of here in the union, because we all work together for the same cause.
Yes.
And I think it's good because there is power in numbers, so to speak, and just to be able to share in the joys and the challenges and the
And the
sorrows that all of us have in common in our humanity. So thank you so much for having me on again. I really feel privileged to be able to be a part of this. Paul, I think it's a great program. I think it was wonderful presenters earlier today.
thank you.
I really want to let you know I felt outclassed today.
No.
I said, boy, you know, Melissa and Dr. Boyd and Brother Goodman. I just think, well, okay, what can I say? But anyway, it's a privilege. That's what I'm saying. It's a humble privilege to be in that cast, and it was a wonderful.
Well, thank you.
They did a fantastic job. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, you know, we'll look to have you back to share what's
Thank you.
happening around the conference.
I appreciate it.
So again, listeners, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you have been inspired. We hope that you've been informed. We hope that it has integrated, you know, ideas that you can implement in terms of your faith principles. We here at the Public Square, we will continue to bring you programming that is relevant, that will actually address the many issues when it comes to public affairs and religious liberty. We understand coming up this weekend is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. We want to encourage you to get involved. We want to encourage you to follow the example of Jesus Christ and advocate on behalf of others. You've heard the quote in terms of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, injustice everywhere. And so we want you to do your part in being an advocate for others and joining in the work that we have been called to do as Christians. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time in the Public Square.